4 years, there's nothing. No confirmed sightings, no answers, just a car burned in an alley and a voice on the phone that won't go away.
So at this point, they still don't know what happened to her.
No. They don't know where she is. They don't know if she's alive. All they have are those calls. And then, in August of 1984, that changes because a construction worker in Anaheim comes across something in a field.
What does he find?
Human remains, partial skeletal remains, scattered.
And they're able to identify her from that?
Eventually, dental records confirm it. The remains belong to Dorothy Jane Scott, which means this was never just a disappearance. It was always a murder. So, Angela, how's it going tonight?
It's all right. How are you?
I'm good.
You haven't asked me that in a minute.
I haven't, no.
Yeah.
So, you weren't able to get your schedule to work out to record episode 1 of this.
I couldn't get it together.
Well, that's fine. But
I failed.
You did listen to my take on episode 1.
I did.
And so, what are your thoughts so far? And you had some questions that came up in episode 1 when you listened to it?
I did.
All right, hit me with it.
I want to know, where's the son's father?
So he's going to come up in this episode.
Okay. Is he part of this possible?
We'll talk about it tonight.
Okay.
Yep.
So I also want to know, with the conversations that, like the phone calls that she was getting, the stalking at work, did any of her coworkers hear those? I realize that this is back in the day when you can't record them, but are there eyewitnesses?
No, I guess ear witnesses.
Literal. So literal.
I guess really the closest ear witness, if you want to say that, would be Vera, her mom. And that came after her disappearance.
But
because
no one at work, like she didn't outcry as soon as she hung up the phone, like, fuck, watch my mouth. Like this happened again.
Oh, yeah, she did. She talked to her friends. She talked to her family about it. So it was no mystery that this was going on.
Okay.
Pam Hurd, who was a good friend of hers and coworker, who I talked about quite a bit in the first episode, she knew about it. So people that were close to her knew that this was going on. It was not kept secret.
We don't think it was anyone that she worked with. Was anyone that she worked with acting funny after she disappeared?
We'll be talking about it tonight.
Those are my questions. Looks like I hit on something.
Yep.
All right.
Anything else? Anything else that come up in that episode?
Not yet,
or anything that I didn't do a great job covering? Or
no.
Okay.
I wanted to know, immediately wanted to know where the kid's dad was.
Yeah.
I was like, but that's, what is that? Always. You always go for who's the ex.
Always.
So.
Yep. Okay.
You knew I was coming up with that.
Yeah, I kind of figured as much. Well, welcome back, listeners, to Dark Dialogue, the podcast where we unravel the shadows of the human mind and dive deep into the mysteries that haunt small towns and big cities alike. I'm your host, John.
And I'm Angela. And together we shine a light on the stories that keep us up at night, the unsolved disappearances, the lives stolen too soon, and the questions that refuse to be buried.
In the last episode, we walked through Dorothy Jane Scott's final known hours. The calls, the hospital, the narrow window where she disappears, and the evidence that showed that this was not random.
So someone was targeting her.
Yeah, and now we know how it ends. Her remains are found 4 years later, which means that this case isn't about just a disappearance anymore. It's about what happened in between.
And who was behind it.
Exactly.
Because I want to know. And you know.
Oh, I know. We all want to know. Because now we're not just asking how she was taken. We're asking what the evidence actually tells us about the person who did it. Before we go any farther, let's lock in what we actually know. So we know that this was not random. We know that she's been getting calls for months, and the calls are very specific. They're personal. This freaking psycho piece of shit shows up at her house and leaves her a dead rose.
Yeah.
So he knows where she lives. He has access to her. This is escalating over this series of months leading up to this disappearance.
Yeah, she's being singled out.
Yes, it was absolutely directed at her. And it involves multiple locations. I talked about this in the first episode, but it's really striking to me that it happened the night that it did. Because, like I said, she was not following a routine. This was completely out of nowhere that she decides to take Connor to the hospital, or Conrad to the hospital. So that wasn't planned. So like I said in the first episode, it was either somebody that was in that meeting that night, or it was somebody that was sitting outside that meeting waiting for her.
And then outside the hospital for 2 hours, you said.
Well, and then had to
followed her to her parents and then the hospital.
Right. If they weren't in that meeting, then they would have had to have followed her to her parents' house and sat there and waited, and then followed her to the hospital, because there was essentially no way for a stalker to know where she was headed.
Yeah.
Unless they followed her to her parents' house and then followed her to the hospital.
Yeah.
And, you know, I talked about it in the first episode as well, that this is a lot of movement. And we're going to talk about that even more tonight. So the whole car issue keeps coming up. And I do realize that this is Anaheim. There's cab companies. It's just that, and I don't know if that was ever checked out by police. I could find no record of that. But you would think that a cab company would have a record of a pickup and a drop off, a pickup somewhere in the neighborhood of where the car was burnt, and a drop off somewhere near the hospital.
Yeah.
The only other thing that I could come up with is if they dropped the car off somewhere near where they lived, then they could have walked from the car to their house. But it still doesn't answer the question of how they got to the hospital.
Right. And it doesn't stay in one place.
No, like I said, it spreads out, and it's going to spread out even more tonight. And there's no confirmed struggle. We have a dropped cigarette pack and we have a box of Kleenexes, likely is tied to this case, but we can't say for sure. There's no witnesses that anything happened. And her car leaves that lot, obviously under somebody's control.
So whatever happened here, it was very quick.
Yeah, quick and very controlled. The caller knew details about her life, and then he later displayed that he knew details that were never made public, like the whole red scarf incident.
So he's not guessing at this.
No, he knows things that he should not know.
Exactly. That's why they hold things back.
Right. And so when you put all of this together, you've got targeting, you've got movement, you've got control, and you've got knowledge. You're just not looking at something that's random.
You're looking at someone who knew what they were doing.
Yeah, that's really what it suggests. All right, so fast forward from that whole mysterious freaking night in May of 1980 to August the 6th of 1984. And there's a construction crew that is working outside of Anaheim. And today, I don't know if this would really be considered outside of Anaheim, because you know how shit grows, and especially in California.
It's all stuck together now.
But at this particular time, this is outside of Anaheim. And I think they call it the Anaheim Hills, or the Santa Ana Hills, or some shit like that, some kind of hills. And a crew is out there and they're digging in, I believe it was phone lines. And one of the crew members goes to head off to look at something or whatever. The crew jokingly says something like, "Hope you don't stumble across a body," or something like that. And that's exactly what he did. He went out there and stumbled across the body.
Right, when they weren't even looking for her.
Exactly.
That's a fun day.
Yeah, it's totally accidental. Doing the work that I've done, I have often thought about that. I've been in so many crawl spaces where the whole John Wayne Gacy story just comes back to me. I'm like, yeah, especially when I was working in downtown Denver and shit like that. And I'm like, what are the odds that I have crawled in a crawl space that there's a body buried in at some point, you know?
Please don't be today. Please
Yeah.
don't be today. Yeah.
But for this poor guy, it was that day and completely accidental. The bones are initially believed to be an animal, and then human remains are found. And so what is actually discovered is we have human bones and we have bones from a dog. And they're kind of mixed together.
Interesting and gross.
And we'll get into that a little bit more as we work through this. So, but what we do know is we have a partial skeletal remains. Everything was not recovered. But what was recovered is the skull with the teeth, which is very important, obviously. The pelvis is found, the femurs are found, and at least one arm bone is found. But again, a lot of the remains are missing and have never been found.
Never a full body.
No, just the partial remains. The bones are sun bleached. They've been laying in the sun, which obviously tells us that she wasn't buried. And they're also partially charred, burned. And they're scattered across roughly a 20 to 25 foot area. And it's believed that animal activity contributed to this. The scattering? There are a lot of coyotes in this area. It's also not really that far from Anaheim. So I'm sure that there's dogs that are running in this area, probably wild dogs running in this area. I think that mountain lions, bobcats, these are all animals that could be living in that area. So having predators and scavengers is normal for where this is at. And it's obvious that they've been there for a long time. You know, it takes some time for a body to decompose totally to skeletal remains. And then it takes a significant amount of time for a body to get sun bleached, for the bones to get sun bleached.
Right. This obviously didn't just happen.
Right. It's not recent. We could say that for sure. And then there were a couple of personal items that were found near the body as well. There was a turquoise ring found and a wristwatch. And both of those items were identified by Dorothy's mom.
So that's how they know it was her.
Well, that and the dental records. So there was
But that's how they knew first-ish.
Right. I mean, it's pretty freaking obvious. If you take personal items, especially jewelry, because a lot of the times jewelry is unique. Now, I think this watch was a Timex watch, so it's not like it's a one-of-a-kind piece. But if you have a watch, even if it's a very common Timex watch, and you have a ring, a turquoise ring, I don't know a lot about this particular ring. A lot of turquoise jewelry is custom built, one of a kind pieces. Yeah. I don't know if that's the case, but even if it's not, if you have a ring that matches her ring and a watch that matches her watch, even if they're relatively common, the likelihood that they'd both be on one person, really kind of narrows it down.
It is pretty rare to mass produce turquoise rings, real turquoise.
It really is. They're very commonly like an artisan type piece. They build them. They never make another one just like it. Yeah. Well, maybe another one that looks similar, but never the same thing.
They let the piece move them. So it's built around the shape of the piece. Yeah. Yep.
But they do then go and do a dental comparison, and they confirm unequivocally that this is the remains of Dorothy Jane Scott. Unfortunately, they could not find any cause of death. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that it had been 4 years. She is significantly decomposed. She's pretty much totally just skeletal at this point. It's worth noting that there's no clear trauma that's been identified, but there is exposure to, like I said, the sunlight, to fire, and then obviously just the time that it's been.
All right. So at this point, they don't know how she died.
No, not from the remains. Now, it's important to note here that I said that her remains were burned, right?
And her car was burned.
But before we jump to conclusions,
that's what I'm here for.
This is California.
This is okay.
And this area was hit by a brush fire in 1982. And so investigators come to the conclusion that the charring is attributed to that brush fire.
Oh, okay. So they're thinking that's innocent.
Correct.
Okay.
But it also helps them date that. They don't think that it's part of the crime, but they also can now unequivocally say that her remains were likely in this place for at least 2 years. At least they were there prior to 1982
so
when the fire
They
burned.
think she's been there for years.
Yeah. I mean, they could say pretty much unequivocally that she was placed there before the 1982 fire. I think she was placed there an hour or two after she was taken.
Really?
I do.
Okay. You going to explain?
Yep, we will get there.
Let's get there.
Now we know where she was found, but we still don't know how the hell she got there. There's something that I think is important about this location. And if you look it up, it does not look today like it looked then. I already said that.
Right. Well, nothing does.
Nothing does. But especially California. California has exploded from 1980 until 2026. This area, Southern California, has exploded.
Right.
There's been so much development that has occurred, especially through the 90s and 2000s, where you had the big tech boom and everything going on in California, through the late 80s and the early 90s, where it really hit. It was just an explosion. So this area really grew a lot. So it doesn't look anything like it did then. In 1980 to 1984, this was really at the edge of the development. This was out of town, but not like way out of town, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It was essentially a brush-covered hillside, a canyon slope that was near a road. It was right near the freeway, and it wasn't too far from the growing neighborhoods, but it was far enough to be out of sight. You could go to this area and nobody would notice you. Literally, I mapped the discovery location the best that I could. And right now, she would be in someone's backyard. There's literally a house right where she was found.
Okay.
But in 1980, there was nothing there. This was just a hillside. Now, it's not wilderness. It's not like they're out in the middle of freaking nowhere, but it is at the edge of suburbia. It's kind of the first place that you'd hit on your way out of town to get out into the hills. This would be kind of one of the very first stops that you would hit once you left civilization, so to speak.
So technically not remote, but not visible.
Exactly. Close enough to access, but just far enough that you could disappear something. Very easy access by vehicle, a very short distance off the road. Matter of fact, I think it was described as it was either 30 or 90 feet from the center line of this road. So literally right off the road. Limited visibility at night, no nearby houses at that time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not heavily trafficked. It's just a practical location to get rid of a body. You don't have to drive out in the middle of the desert. You're just right out of town.
Yeah.
And if I'm correct about the timing, he had to get rid of the body and get the car back in order to light it on fire by 4:30 the next morning. And then there's this other part of the story that always gets a lot of attention. And it's one of those that as I dug into this case, at first I was like all over this. And then the more I researched it, well, you'll see where I get.
Okay.
And that is the dog. So like I said, dog remains are found at the scene in the same general area that Dorothy's remains are found. No confirmed connection between the two, however.
But people assume that it's connected. I did.
They do.
I did immediately.
But there's a problem with that. At least there's one problem if there's not multiple problems. There's no evidence, first of all, that
it's very coincidental, though.
Maybe. But there's no evidence that the dog and Dorothy were placed there at the same time. There's no timeline that's tying them together.
So we think maybe somebody's pet died and...
Well, here's the thing. If you research this case, you're going to find that Dorothy was buried with dog bone, with a dog buried on top of her. That is what you're going to find. And then you're going to find all kinds of stuff explaining how murderers will bury dogs on top of bodies so that if somebody's digging them up and they find a dog, they think that it's all dog bones. And you're going to find all kinds of satanic ties to dog sacrifices and this kind of stuff. And that's why I say when I first started researching this, I was like, wow, okay. But then you really get to researching it. There's no evidence that she was buried. Matter of fact, there's a lot more evidence that she was not buried because her bones are sun bleached and burned by a brush fire.
Yeah.
So the thought that she's buried under a dog means that she's definitely got to be buried deep enough that you can get her and a dog in the hole. How did she get burned? And how did she get burned in the fire? And how did her bones get sun bleached? She wasn't buried. And then you have the other problem with this is she is scattered over, like I said, the remains that were found. The remains that were found are scattered over a 20 to 25 foot area. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's where she was deposited, that's where her body was dumped that night. She could have been dumped anywhere on that hillside, and rain, especially after the fire, where you didn't have all the trees and stuff, you have like the mudslides and that kind of stuff. She could have, the remains that were found could have easily been displaced by flooding and stuff like that and flooded down into that lower area. And dog bones could have also flooded at the same time.
Right. There's no telling what could have flooded down there. There's
no telling. Or she was dumped in that general location and animals scattered her bones and stuff. And sometime in a 4-year period, somebody maybe lost a family pet and disposed of them out there. Maybe a dog went out there and just happened to die. I mean, you know, shit, I go out around here all the time, and there's a lot less civilization in Wyoming than there is in California, in Anaheim, California. And I find bones all over the place. I'm always coming across dog bones, deer bones, antelope bones, elk bones, name it. They're all over the place. I see bones everywhere. So the idea that in a 4-year span, there's bones from a human and any other animal doesn't link the two, at least in my mind. One does not equal the other.
So we don't actually know how or if these two things are related.
We don't.
Okay.
I strongly suspect there's no relation whatsoever, but that's just my take on it. If you go to digging into this, you're going to find a lot of stuff about these dog bones.
A lot of people connecting dots that might not be there.
Okay. Yeah. And you know how I am. Every time I hear satanic, I'm always like, okay, pump the brakes here. All right. So I don't know. This is 1984, right at the beginning of the satanic panic. It definitely fits why that would have been pushed at that point. So when you look at everything else in this case, the movement, the timing, the vehicle, adding the dog component doesn't fit into this sequence. So you're telling me that if my theory's right, and I don't think I'm the only one that has this theory, I think this is the cops' theory as well. This guy kidnaps this woman from the hospital, steals her car. He's either got a dead dog in his backpack or...
Because we travel with those to cover things up.
He's got to swing by his house or someplace else to pick up a dog carcass. And then he's got to drive it and her out there. And then he's got to dispose of her and the dog. And then he's got to drive back into town. He's got to stop at a gas station, either buy a gas can, or maybe he picked up the gas can when he picked up the dead dog, or he had the gas can and the dead dog in his backpack. Then he's got to drive the car to the street where it was found burning, light it on fire, and escape. You see where I'm going?
I think I've seen this movie.
It don't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. And that's why I say the dog can't be related, in my opinion. Now, could it be? Well, sure. It could
But it
also
seems very
be,
far-fetched by now.
yeah. I mean, it could also be, like I said, just an completely unrelated disposal of a family pet, a natural death, or something that was just placed there at a different time. And who the hell knows how or why. But we're not talking about the next week. We're talking about a 4-year span.
Mm-hmm. So unless he's wearing a collar that has her name on it, we're not tying the dog.
Exactly.
Okay.
Unless there's some evidence that says that the two are tied together.
Mm-hmm.
You just, in my opinion, you just can't treat the two as being, it would be like saying, you know, she was found on this slope in this canyon in California. There was a cedar bush there. The cedar bush must be involved in her murder. It's like, well, they grow there too. You know what I'm saying?
No, they don't.
You know, there's sagebrush here. She was beat to death with a sagebrush.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to me, it's the same logic.
Yeah.
So I don't think that they're related.
So it's just noise unless you can prove it matters.
Exactly. What does matter is what we can actually connect to Dorothy. And right now, the dog is not one of those things. But there is something at that scene that matters a whole hell of a lot more than the dog. And that is her watch.
I was hoping you were going to say sagebrush.
Unfortunately, no.
Dang it. Okay.
So like I said, the wristwatch was found with her remains. It was identified by her mom and it stopped. This is kind of like out of a movie. It stopped at 12:30 a.m. on May 29th, 1980.
So that gives us a time.
At least a possible time. It's not a guaranteed one,
It narrows
but it's
it.
pretty freaking credible.
Yeah.
I mean, it stops, give or take, what, an hour to an hour and a half after she's last seen alive?
True.
Yeah. Now, we don't know why it stopped. It could have been an impact. It could have been environment. I guess technically it could have been a battery. So it's not necessarily a timestamp, but it sure does line up with everything else. The car leaving the hospital just before 11:30 and the watch stops at 12:30. So that's about an hour.
So whatever happened happens in that window.
That's the window that it points to.
Okay.
So now if we go back to the geography, we got to talk about what had to have occurred. They had to have gone from the hospital out to this canyon to Santa Ana where the car was dropped off. So I did the math on this. You're roughly 10 to 15 miles from the hospital to the body site, 10 to 15 miles from the body site to the car dump. So you're driving roughly 20 to 25 miles. It's not 40 miles. It's not 80 miles, but it is tight.
And all of this fits inside that same window.
It can, you know, with the late night driving, it's very workable. So now you've got about an hour to leave the hospital and get to that area. And then, you know, whatever happens there, it's not a long time. And this is where something becomes very clear. I alluded to it in the first episode, but it's very definitive now. This is not happening on foot.
Right. There's no way.
No way. Not with these distances, not with that time. So at some point, there's at least an additional vehicle involved, be it a cab, be it a friend, something.
Do you really think somebody's taken a cab to a crime?
I think it's the most likely.
Okay.
As crazy as it sounds, I think it's the most likely. So now we go back to what we talked about before, the movement, the timing, the control, and this body disposal site, it tightens that whole problem. Because now it's not just that it required movement, but now it requires very efficient movement.
So whoever did this knew exactly where they were going.
That's sure what it looks like to me. I think that this was all planned pretty much down to the minute. So now that we understand the movement, the next question is, why here? Well, like I said, it's right at the edge of the development. It's on a brush-covered hillside, near the road, near the freeway. There's easy access. It's a short distance off the road. And like I said before, it's low visibility at night.
So it's convenient.
It is. And you don't have to go deep into anywhere. You don't have to drive miles and miles away.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to know that this spot's there. And that's where this really starts to become important because, places like this, you don't just stumble across them on accident, especially within an hour.
Right. So this could be somewhere that this guy already knew about.
It could be. And I think that it is for sure. I think that it's somewhere that he had been before. So he gets in and out without being seen. And to me, that does suggest a level of comfort.
Yeah, not just guessing where to next.
No, he's not wandering around the area looking for a spot to get rid of a body. He's got an hour to do all this shit. And it's not a long period of time when you got to drive 20 to 25 miles round trip, murder somebody, dispose of a body. That's efficient.
Potentially find a dog.
Potentially pick up your dog, kill it on the way. Yeah. So, to me, it tells me this was planned. He knew exactly where he was going. As soon as he got her in that car, I think he headed straight for this canyon spot. He doesn't go somewhere that's remote, that's isolated miles and miles away. And he doesn't take any extreme steps to try to conceal the body.
Right. He's not hiding it to make it impossible to find.
No, not at all. But
it still takes 4 years.
He's trying to move it out of sight to get it where it's not obvious. And so when you factor in the time window, he does not have hours to figure this out. He has to already know where he's going. So it's not a random dumping. It's directed movement. He knew exactly where he was going.
It feels like every step of this is intentional.
It's what it looks like to me. Now we've got someone who targeted her, someone who knew where she was, someone who could move her efficiently, and someone that knew where to go. So that does start to narrow things down.
So is this where you tell us who we're thinking about?
That's where we're going to go next.
Okay.
Before we keep going, I want to take a quick second. If you've been listening to Dark Dialogue, you already know that this isn't just storytelling. Every episode is built around one goal, keeping the focus on the victim and working towards the truth. So if that matters to you, make sure that you're following the show on whatever platform you're listening on. And if you haven't yet, take a second to leave a rating or a review. It makes a bigger difference than people realize. And it's what helps these cases reach people who otherwise wouldn't even hear them. All right, so let's get back to the story. So when we start looking at potential suspects, there's one name that comes up a lot, and that's Dorothy's employer.
The owner of the shop.
Both shops, actually, yes.
Okay.
Swingers Psych Shop and Custom John's Head Shop.
Okay.
So like we talked about in the first episode, she worked as a secretary and bookkeeper for him in those two connected shops. And they're owned by a guy by the name of John Cosilla. And he is going to later be indicted for federal tax evasion.
Oh, nice.
In 1996. That part is absolutely documented. That's not theory. He was indicted. And so naturally, to me, it doesn't mean shit, but people start asking the question. She was his bookkeeper. He has now been indicted for tax evasion. What did she know?
So she's handling the books. She could see something that he's trying to erase.
She could, but we have absolutely no evidence of this. And it's 16 years after the fact. So could it be possible?
It doesn't seem.
But I mean, he is listed as like a number one suspect in a lot of people's minds because of this tie-in. To me, it's a reach. And then there's also this other claim that he owns the land that her body was found on.
Really?
But here's the problem. I could find no verified record of that. I could find nothing that ties him to that property. That claim comes from secondary sources like Reddit and some other podcasters and stuff like that. But as far as looking at property records, now I'm not saying I didn't miss something. I'm saying I couldn't independently verify that he owned that land.
Right. So we can't confirm that.
No, not with anything solid, at least. I tried to apply some constraints to every one of these suspects. You know what I do.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to ask, does this employer model fit what we're seeing? The only motivation that anybody has implied about this employer is his indictment for tax evasion in 96. Now, does that kind of a murder fit with months of stalking? The personal language, my love, I love you. We're supposed to spend our lives together. All this other horse shit, the jealousy. And then the ongoing contact after the disappearance. He called her mom for like 4 freaking years after the fact.
The person or the boss?
The killer.
Okay. So that doesn't sound like financial.
It doesn't to me. It's nothing I've ever heard of before.
No.
Like this kind of behavior is actual documented. It's an actual documented pathology. These psycho stalkers that build this weird ass relationship in their own mind that doesn't exist anywhere else. And they live within this relationship. And sometimes it turns to murder, like that girl that was in My Sister Sarah. You remember back in the 80s? Shit, I can't think of her name. Anyway, there was a show in the 80s called My Sister Sarah. And the girl that was like the main character in that show, a crazy stalker, she had like a sex scene, or I think it was just a kissing scene with the guy. And her crazy stalker come and murdered her because
she was cheating.
Because she was cheating.
Quoting, yeah.
That is the kind of person I think that we're dealing with here.
What kind of stuff was he saying to her mom?
When he called her, little short sentences like I have her, I think was the first call. Okay. I killed her.
But nothing like she was my love. Nothing like that.
That's what he said to the newspaper when he called the newspaper.
Oh, fun. Okay.
Could the employer be involved in this? It's not impossible, but based on what we actually have, there is nothing that directly connects him to this crime. And there is no indication to me in all of this action, everything that's going on, that this has a financial motive to it. This is a psycho stalker. This is not I'm killing you because you know about my finances type of thing. So certainly we could never build a case around this guy.
Okay, so where does that leave us?
In my opinion, it leaves us looking somewhere else. And so the next name that comes up is a guy by the name of Dennis Terry. Now, Dennis Terry is Sean's biological father.
So her son's father. So one of my questions answered now.
Yes.
Got it.
So he is, like you say, he's the biological father of Sean. The relationship between him and Dorothy is a little foggy. Nobody really knows. So Dorothy was part of this, I think, a female band at one point and was traveling, and she came back pregnant. That's pretty much the story. So her family really did not know a whole lot about the relationship, if you want to call it that, with Dennis. Dennis had recently come to California, and he and Dorothy had what sounds like a fairly intense argument over the custody of Sean. Dennis's position is, you've had him for 4 years. Now I want to take him for 4 years. Dorothy's position was, you can go to hell. There's no way I'm giving up custody. That is kind of the fight that they had. And it was right around this, right very near her disappearance. So on paper, it definitely checks some boxes.
Recent conflict and personal connection.
Exactly. However, Dennis Terry had already traveled back to Missouri by the time she disappeared. He took a bus. It was documented. He had receipts. Witnesses confirmed the fact that he was in Missouri and not in California when she disappeared.
Proof he's not physically there.
No. So that's important. The law enforcement officers, they took a look at him immediately, obviously, for exactly the reasons that you asked about him.
Mm-hmm.
We know that he's a likely candidate. We have a confirmed recent custody dispute going on with Sean.
Right.
Perfect motive for murder.
Mm-hmm.
Something that we've seen over and over and over and over again in cases.
Yeah.
So law enforcement had an absolute responsibility to look at this guy, but he's cleared almost immediately. He could not have done it. When you look at what this case requires, this person has to be in California. They have to be able to move across multiple locations. They have the timing. They have the control. It's not Dennis Terry. Based on everything that we know, Dennis Terry is not responsible for the disappearance and murder of Dorothy Jane Scott.
So we're not necessarily looking at someone in her past.
Well, not like that anyway. Now, the next suspect is the one that the vast majority of people land on. The name that comes up more than anybody else in this case, and I would say probably at least 5-1, if not 10-1. And that guy's name is Mike Butler.
So this is the one people think did it.
Yeah. In the unofficial side of this case, the internet web sleuth side of this case, this is your guy. He lived and worked in the area. He worked right across the street from Swinger's Psych Shop. His sister worked with Dorothy. He's a known acquaintance. There's not a close relationship between the two, but he is a known acquaintance of her. He's in her orbit. He works at a spot where he could easily observe her pretty much all day, at least while she's at Swingers. He had the access. He could see her daily routine. He knew her routine. He knew where she worked. He knew when she worked. Like I said, the caller knew about her clothing. He knew about her movements. It fits someone who had the opportunity to observe her on a regular basis. And Dorothy said that the voice on the phone sounded familiar, but she couldn't quite place it.
So it's someone she knew, but not too well.
Exactly. Somebody that had a fixation on her. You know, we had the personal language, a long-term contact. That matches the pattern that we've been talking about. He also lived in the area where the body was disposed of. He's familiar with that terrain. So all of that lines up with the disposal site. And then this is something that I didn't get to in the first episode, but like I said, the caller continued to call Vera, her mom, pretty much every Wednesday afternoon for 4 years. And then the thought is that he was calling her on Wednesday afternoons because that was a certain time that her husband would not be there.
Oh, so now she's being watched.
Potentially. And then one Wednesday afternoon, the father answers the phone. And that's the last call. So some people believe that the father could have potentially recognized the voice on the phone.
But that's not confirmed at all?
No, it's inference. And I don't believe that he did, because if the father had recognized the voice on the phone, he would have been right to the freaking police. He'd have been yelling it at the top of his freaking lungs.
Right.
This is Bob. I know Bob's voice. This is Bob. I heard him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is it a possibility that the caller hung up and got scared that the father could potentially recognize his voice? I guess so. Yeah. But I don't know. Now, what pushes Mike Butler to the top of the list is, you know, he's repeatedly mentioned Dorothy's son, Sean, believes that it's Mike Butler. He believes that Mike is the man responsible for his mother's death. But here's the issue. There's no physical evidence. There's no confirmed placement. There's nothing placing him at the hospital, the dump site, the car location. There's no forensic links.
So everything that does point to him
is circumstantial. Now, he's known to police. He's never been charged. He's not been publicly named as a suspect. So he's never been formally tied to this. Now, does he fit parts of this? Yeah, he does. But fitting and proving are not the same thing.
So we don't actually know if it's him.
No, we don't.
But why does a 4-year-old think it's him?
You know, it's difficult. How do I say this in a tactful way? I think a lot of the times the families of these victims cling to the most obvious. And I'm not saying if it's Mike Butler or if it's not Mike Butler. I'll be giving some of my opinions as we go through this. But I do think the thoughts of the family of the victim a lot of the times are more emotional than factually driven. And Mike Butler, because of his proximity, I don't know. There's a lot of stuff that ties him to the occult, which you know how I am with that shit.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got the whole dog bone situation, which I've already been clear about how I feel with that stuff. And so if you take the occult part out of it, then there's not a whole lot except for the fact that apparently Mike at one time said that he was in love with Dorothy and wanted to marry her. And he lived near where the body disposal was. Now, in my mind, and I think I talk about this a little bit later, but I'll just go ahead and say it now. In my mind, with geographical profiling, I would anticipate the body dump being away from where he lives as opposed to near where he lives. Typically, that's the case. Typically, you know, they're not going to drive 7 hours away, but they also usually do not want to dump a body right near where they live because it makes them look guilty. So the fact that the body was dumped near where he lived almost is a strike against him in my book. But at the end of the day, we have no evidence either way. So he's going to always be a suspect. There's no doubt about that. But that's kind of where he has to stay. So now instead of chasing names, let's do this another way. Let's instead look at what this person has to be.
Based on what we actually know.
Exactly. We know that this was not random. This person chose Dorothy specifically, and he focused on her for months. And that requires a lot of attention. He had to be able to see her on a regular basis, consistently. He knew her routine.
So he's close enough to observe her.
Close enough, or at least positioned where he could. He knows details. He knows what she's wearing. He knows where she is. He knows who she's with. So it's not guesswork. He acts at exactly the right moment. Not during the day, not when she's surrounded by people, when she's just briefly alone.
So he's just creeping, sitting back, watching and waiting.
That's what it suggests. And then there's no confirmed struggle. There's no noise. There's no witnesses. This is controlled behavior. He then moves her efficiently across multiple locations within a very tight time window.
And he's not improvising?
No, this is not chaotic. At some point, he has access to a vehicle. That is not optional. We've already discussed that. He knows where to go. He doesn't search for a location. He goes to that one.
So that place possibly means something to him.
It could, or at least it's somewhere that he's comfortable with. And then he calls. Not once, but for years. That's not someone disappearing.
Someone staying connected to it.
Yeah. And keeping hold of that control. So what do we have? Someone who chooses her. Someone who can watch her. Someone who knows her routine. Someone who waits for the right moment. Someone who can move her and her car. And someone who keeps coming back after all of that's over.
So that's not random.
No, that is intentional. So before we go any further, we need to be clear about something. This profile is not just a theory.
I'm assuming you've tested it
against everything that we have.
Okay.
So we've taken this behavior, the stalking, the surveillance, the abduction, the movement, the calls, and I've ran it against every major theory. The employer theory, I've already said it. It does not match the behavior. The ex-partner, Dennis Terry, that doesn't match his logistics or the pattern. It wasn't him. And Butler matches a lot. He has the access, the familiarity, the proximity.
But not everything.
Not the most important part, in my opinion. And that is the calls. That is the signature. That is the psychological fingerprint of this offender. And when you step back, the profile that holds together the best is not someone obvious.
It's someone in the background.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's someone that knew her, but someone that she didn't really know.
Interesting.
It's somebody that is workplace adjacent, a fixation-driven watcher. He is seen, but he's not noticed. He's familiar, but not identifiable. He's present, but he's invisible.
And that changes how you look at this.
It does, because if that's who he is, then geography matters. Let's step away from the names for a minute and just look at the geography, because like I've said, this case is tight. We've got 4 locations: her work, Swingers Psych Shop, the hospital, where her car is burned, where her body's found. And they're all inside the same area. So this is not spread across counties. This isn't long distance movement. This is all happening inside northern Orange County.
Right. Whoever did this is operating locally.
That's sure what it points to. And when you map those points, it's not random. It forms a pattern. So this is a working area. Short movement from the hospital, and then another move, and then the car is burned, all within a tight window. The car is not taken far away. It's left in a neighborhood. It's not hidden miles out in the country somewhere.
So that's somewhere familiar.
It looks that way. And I would posit that it is within walking distance for the killer. Like I said earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And then the body that's in the foothills, right at the edge of development, not wilderness, not random. So what you're seeing is someone moving through places that they already know. Not one location, a set of places that all connect.
Part of his normal world.
Yeah, that's the best way to put it. And this is where people get tripped up, because they start looking for somebody obvious, someone that's visible. But this geography does not require someone obvious. It just requires somebody that's present.
Someone who's just around.
Exactly. Someone who can watch without being noticed. Someone who knows her routine without being a part of her life. And that's important, because the kind of offender that this points to is not somebody who's stepping forward. It's not someone that's making himself known. This is someone that's in the background, and that's where they're comfortable at.
Mm-hmm.
Someone that she may have seen, but she never really noticed.
And that's the person you're looking at.
That's who seems to fit to me.
Okay.
So now if we take everything, the calls, the movement, the location, and we put it all together.
This is where it starts to make sense.
This is someone who fixates over time, quietly. And when I was putting this together, I got to thinking about Silence of the Lambs.
Uh-huh.
How do we begin to covet? We covet what we see every day.
Yep.
He doesn't act right away. He watches her. He learns her routines. He learns where she is and when.
So this is building long before that night at the hospital.
Months before, at least. And I posit much longer, because if you look at these freaking whack jobs, they build up to every every piece of this they build up to. So he could have spent months or even years building up the nerve to call her.
Mm-hmm.
He could have done a bunch of innocuous shit that she didn't even know, but he thought that he was giving her signals or giving her gifts.
Right.
I mean, it could have been anything. We don't know. Maybe she found a live flower on her car one day, 8 months before the call started, and she was like, huh, that's random. Never mentioned it to nobody because why would you?
Yeah.
Well, this freaking psychopath left her a gift that she threw away and, or, whatever.
Mhm.
I'm just making shit up, but
Yeah.
these guys cook this shit up in their minds. Nobody else knows about it. It only exists in their own deluded reality. So who knows? But we do know there was probably a period of time before the call started where all of this was building. And this is not the kind of person. And this is one of the biggest reasons that Mike Butler isn't a great fit for me, because Mike said that he loved her and he wanted to marry her. This kind of offender doesn't say that shit.
Mhm.
This kind of offender doesn't say anything because nobody even knows who the hell they are. They're not related. It could be the mailman. It could be, who knows? These guys are out of their minds. This is one of the hardest ones for me to even get my mind wrapped around, because they see shit like if they were walking down the street and they passed each other and he said hi to her and she smiled. Well, that means that she's madly in love with him and wants to spend the rest of her life with him. And that was the moment. And he probably celebrates that day as the day that they fell in love. And she has no clue.
Just because it hits you like that, dude.
Yeah. So this likely started building at least months before the calls. And then he starts calling, but not to talk, to control the situation. That's the connection. He uses language like my love, and then he gets all jealous and starts talking, about how she's cheating on him, and then he's going to kill her. But it doesn't mean that there's any real relationship.
Right. That's one-sided.
Completely. And here's what matters. This is not, like I said, someone who steps forward. This is a coward. This is not somebody who will approach her. It's not somebody that can risk rejection face to face. Everything that he does it at a distance. When he does act, it's fast and it's controlled and it's planned. He waits for a moment that she's alone, and then he doesn't just disappear. He keeps calling.
He stays in it.
He needs to. He has to. It's part of him. And when you look at cases like this, it falls into a pattern, a type of offender who builds this weird, deluded fantasy, who seeks this connection that he can't form in reality. It's sometimes referred to as a power reassurance offender. Now, that's not a diagnosis, and I'm not somebody that can diagnose, but it is a framework. This is someone that wants a relationship, who believes there is a relationship and acts on that belief.
Even when it's not real.
Especially when it's not real. The calls fit that. The surveillance fits that. The control fits that. And the geography fits someone who lives inside of her world, but outside of her awareness. This is not a stranger passing through, and it's not somebody from her past. This is someone who was there, watching, waiting, and never really seen.
And that's the person who took her.
That's who fits this. So when you step back from all of this, the evidence, the movement, the behavior, you start to see a picture form. And I know I'm probably in the minority on this, but I do not believe that it was Mike Butler. A lot of things fit. I cannot argue with that. On paper, he checks a lot of boxes. But when you line that up against the behavior that we've been looking at, the distance, the control, the way that this offender operates, it just doesn't land there for me. And that's not me saying who did this. It's me saying what this case actually supports. Because offenders like this, the ones who watch, who fixate, who build this kind of quiet, long-term control, they're usually not the ones that are raising red flags. They're not the loud ones. They're not the obvious ones. They're the ones in the background, the ones that you pass every day and you never think twice about it. And that's what makes cases like this so difficult, because the person responsible may have never stood out, may have never been questioned, may have lived their life completely unnoticed. And when you combine that with the reality of the evidence, then you start to understand the limits of what's possible here. This is a scene that sat undiscovered for years. Partial remains, environmental damage, a vehicle that was intentionally burned. We don't know what was recovered, and we don't know what was preserved. But it's not hard to see that this is not a case built on strong physical evidence. And time only makes that harder. Witnesses disappear, memories fade, people who may have known something are no longer here to say it. So the truth is, we may never have a definitive answer in this case. And that's difficult to sit with, but that doesn't mean that it stops here, because what we can do is we can make sure that Dorothy Jane Scott is never forgotten, that her story is told accurately, responsibly, and without turning it into something that it's not. Because at the center of all of this is a mother, a daughter, a woman who was doing exactly what she always did, and that was helping somebody else. And that matters. So before we move into the victim tribute, do you have anything to add, any thoughts, any questions, or anything like that?
I don't think so right now. I think you've done very well at answering them this time.
All right, good. So with that being said, this is Heavy Heart by the J.J. Hawk Band. And this is Dorothy Jane Scott. Dorothy Jane Scott was 32 years old, and for years, her story has been told through questions. What happened to her? Who did this? How could it happen? But behind all of those questions is a life that was real, a life that mattered long before this case ever existed. She was a mother, and not just in name, but in the way that she lived her life. Everything that she did was centered around her son. The routines, the structure, the choices that she made every day were about giving him stability and giving him love. She stayed close to her family. She built her life around people that she trusted. She didn't chase attention. She didn't take risks. She lived quietly and with intention. And on the night that she disappeared, she was doing something simple, something kind, something completely in line with who she was. She saw someone who needed help, and she stepped in. That moment, that decision, isn't just part of this case. It's a reflection of who she was. And what makes this loss so heavy is not just what was taken from her. It's everything that never got the chance to happen. The years that her son didn't get with his mother, the guidance, the conversations, the presence that shapes a life in ways that we don't always see until it's gone. Her family didn't just lose answers. They lost time. They lost moments that can never be replaced. And even now, decades later, her story is still being told because she mattered, because she still matters. Dorothy Jane Scott should still be here, and she deserves to be remembered, not for the mystery, but for the life that she lived and the love that she gave.
can hold me, no storm can break. This heavy heart will never fade.